Hi there, welcome to a practical Python example. Here we're going to try to quickly go through some code to try and figure out if you should learn programming. Should you learn how to use Python? This is more so a quick introduction for you to figure out should you take that next leap, that next step, and take any class. I mean, YouTube has a bunch of them for free, but there's a ton of free resources out there to learn to program with Python. But those tend to kind of jump right in. And so this is a quick intro to figure out if you even want to do that in the first place. And again, this is a very kind of practical approach rather than the technicals of how does the Python programming work. And so here's a kind of quick example, something I would have done at my job. But this is completely made up data. So just kind of randomly generated. And in this example, we're looking at different variables in water. So it could be the amount of irrigation happening there. It could be the mine density. It could be the amount of arsenic in it, a bunch of different variables. And what this plot is, let me zoom out a little bit, is it's looking at 18 different regions and ranking each of these variables for each of those regions. So you can see here on the bottom right, there is a kind of ranking key that tells you how they rank in each area. But all that isn't too important, honestly. The big thing to get out of this is notice we have kind of 6 pretty similar looking graphs. And rather than doing this in something like you might have learned in school, doing it in Excel and kind of repeating the same process 6 times, what's awesome here with Python is you can make one of these plots, make the code for one of these plots, and then build it in a way for it to just repeat that for the different data. So that, for example, let's say you make this plot and then, it turns out I actually need to change the color scheme. Rather than having to go into Excel and change all 6 plots and recreate it, recombine it, with Python you can just upgrade that one line of code to change the color, and it'll loop through and update every plot. So to try and quickly kind of project this idea, I'm gonna go through a much simpler example just so we don't have to dig into the nitty-gritty and try to get to what I find the most powerful and exciting part of Python, which is using its libraries. So that, once we get to that part, if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend I'll leave a bunch of links in the description. There's a ton of different free classes to get to that point. So the kind of simple example we're gonna go through here, this is an example task or job you might be given. Again, this is much more kind of practical. How do we accomplish whatever this goal is, rather than figuring out what's going on in the background of the computer. So the task here is just display every number from 0 to 100 in steps of 5. Simple enough, straightforward enough here. And we're really gonna be doing this with 3 different, methods. Not a Python method, but we're gonna be using 3 different ways to do this. And so the first one will be by hand. I'll be showing you with code, but it's not really using Python how it should be. The second is using some basic Python code. We'll be doing it inside of a loop. And finally, we'll be doing it using a Python library, which really shows, again, I think this is what you're kind of building towards to get that power to do something practical. In whatever field you work in, right? You might not need to know all the technical jargon. So doing this by hand, we could just use a Python list. So this is the first method. Like I said before, this kind of destroys the point of using Python in the first place, but I could literally just write out every number from 0 to, we'll do some autocomplete here. And actually, I won't even finish that. You can kind of see where this is going. But we could do this all the way up until 100. So we could just type it out from 0 to 100. In the real world, obviously you won't really do it like this. You'll be using, if you are working with large data sets, you'll be reading them in with a cool library. But in this example, to keep, we're really focusing here on displaying every number from 0 to 100. We could just write out all of those numbers in there. And now if I print my list, I now, if I typed out every number in there, you would see every number displayed. So that's kind of doing it in a non-Pythonic way. If we actually want to code a way to do this, we could use something called a loop. So if I start with, and by the way, as I go through this, don't worry too much about what am I actually using here. Any introductory Python class you take will explain all of that. Again, the goal here is to figure out do you want the power to what's being done by hand to do it with Python code? That's what hopefully this video will help you figure out. And so instead of doing this all by hand, we could use something called a while loop. So here I'm going to start with x equals 0 because I'm trying to go from 0 to 100 and in steps of 5. So x 0. And I'm going to say while x is less than or equal to 100. So as long as x is smaller than or equal to 100, I'm going to say print x. And then we'll do x is equal to x, same value, plus 5. So we're going to go from 0, and we're going to repeat this code here up until 100. And all we're going to do is increase it by 5. And when I run that, you can see I get every number from 0 to 100. And the real kind of powerful thing you can see here already is just how kind of awesome it is to make changes and kind of manage and update anything you do. So just like I said earlier with my plot, how you can just change one line of code and change the color for every plot. Here, what happens if your boss changes their mind and they actually say, oh, let's go to 0 to 1000 in steps of 5? Well, then I have to go through and add every value up until 1000 if I'm doing it by hand. While when I'm using this Python code, all I have to do here is change my ending here to my while loop to loop up until 1000 rather than 100. And now every number up until 1000 will be displayed. Or if we change it, let's go back to 100. Maybe now the boss wants to go up until 3. In steps of 3, we can also quickly update my code to do that. So we change x equals x plus 3, and now we're doing it in steps of 3. So it's way easier to kind of update whatever your project is depending on how you set up your code. And that's what's kind of really, exciting and amazing. And similarly, the complexity of how this was set up and everything, any introductory Python class will go into loops and while loops. And really the last way here, this is just the part that really excites me, is using a Python library, which maybe to oversimplify it, but what we're really doing here is we're using code that someone else built using Python. But it boils down to more code. But I can do something like import numpy as np. I'm in a markdown cell, 1 second. And what I'm doing when I do this import is it really means now I have this library called NumPy, and I can use any function or any data from this library. I can use anything inside of this library. As soon as I import it, I now have access to anything it can hold. And now I can do something like x is equal to np, because that's the library name, dot a range, array range, and I'm gonna go from 0 up until 100 in steps of 5. And now I'm gonna print x. And when I run that, voila, I get every value from 0. In this case, this 100 is non-inclusive, so we'd actually have to go to 101. But now we have every value from 0 to 100, and all we had to use was a function from this library called NumPy. And so we're essentially using someone else's code to do this exact task that we wanted. And the reason why this is so exciting, at least for me, is if you imagine any task you can really think of, there's a good shot someone in the past had the same thought, the same issue, and they needed it solved, and maybe they used Python. And so really anything you can think of, there's probably a Python library for it. And what's so powerful about this concept is once you understand this, right, so we can use it for accomplishing certain goals, now the task becomes more so, what do I want to learn about, and what kind of task do I want to accomplish? Because let's say you want to get into machine learning, well, that means you just have to learn about some Python libraries related to machine learning. Or if you want to do visualizations, data visualizations, you can just use some libraries related to that. You know, you can just Google it. But that's why I think kind of getting to that point is so powerful on a practical case. Because whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on, if you look up the library for doing that kind of work, that'll take you a lot of the way there. You can tell even from this example, it's not always as simple as, you find the perfect exact function to do exactly what you want. So for example, I had to change the 100 to 101. But if you look at the documentation, you can learn a lot more about how the functions actually work, how the library works, and where you want to continue from there. And so that's really it. If that's something that interests you, being able to use essentially code that other people have written, and maybe if you do get into the nitty-gritty of it, maybe you can even kind of contribute to these projects. So that's what's cool about Python being open source, is you can get to that point. But even if not, it's good to know about this possibility, and so it allows you to just kind of more efficiently accomplish anything you might want to accomplish. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them below, and I'll be happy to answer them. See you around.